All right, so I wanted to transition into the therapeutic themes of this movie because I know that there's a lot of reactions and reviews of this movie, of the Superman movie, but I really want to lean into what makes this show unique, which is really seeing this movie through the eyes of a therapist. If I had to summarize everything about this movie into one primary therapeutic theme, it would be this: the power of belief and choice. This is a really important principle that I want to dive into before we jump into the movie, the therapeutic themes of it. Our beliefs drive our behaviors. And this happens on autopilot, whether we are aware of it or not. Everything that we do, every behavior that we have is driven by our belief system. And so there's a therapeutic model that kind of unpacks this that I wanted to just briefly lay the groundwork for. It's a modality that is one of the most common therapy modalities. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. And the basic idea is that our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors are all interconnected. And a lot of times it's explained kind of like in a triangle. So at the top, you might see the word behaviors, and then the bottom two corners, you'll see thoughts and feelings. And these are all interconnected and kind of form a cycle. At the core of that triangle is our beliefs. These are our belief systems. And that's going to influence our thinking. It's going to influence our feelings and our behaviors ultimately. So if we were to kind of flatten that triangle out, you'd see our beliefs drive our thoughts or our thinking patterns. Those thoughts are what create these feelings, and then these feelings are what drive or fuel our behaviors. So that's kind of where you can come up with that statement of our beliefs drive our behaviors. But really, this movie does a really good job of highlighting there's really three factors that shape our belief systems and ultimately make a big difference in our behaviors. So the first one is our experiences. Our life experiences will shape our beliefs, and that could go positively and reinforce those positive beliefs, or it could be a really negative or traumatic event that shapes our belief systems for the negative and creates a lot of negative thoughts and feelings for us. The second one is our education. So things that we learn, it doesn't necessarily have to be academics, but it could be things that we learn on social media, things that we learn from our friends. It could be something that we read, something that we watch online. But the things that we learn or our education will influence heavily our belief system. And then the third one is our environment, our situations that we're around. So, the people that we're around, the culture that we're immersed in, that will play a huge role in what we believe. And you see that play out in this movie in a really interesting way. So you see this idea that beliefs drive behaviors in Superman's beliefs. You see it in Lex Luthor's belief system, and then really in the people's beliefs, in what they believe about Superman. And over the course of the movie, that starts to change. So what I want to do now is I want to jump into some of the specific nuances of how this plays out in this movie. But if you haven't seen the movie, I'm going to go ahead and drop a spoiler warning right now.
Hey, come on. I haven't seen it yet. It doesn't have anything to do with the plot. Still, I like to go in fresh.
I love that drop so much. All right, so here's what we're going to do. So I want you to keep in mind beliefs drive behaviors, or beliefs fuel our behaviors, and look at the rest of the movie through that lens. So right off the start, we get this, right in the beginning of the movie, it starts with Superman. He got beat up, and he loses a fight for the first time in his life. And so he goes back to the Fortress of Solitude, not just for physical healing, but really what you see is kind of mental and emotional healing as well. And this is where I think seeing this movie as a therapist does definitely shape the way that you see these situations. The question I had was, what do you think some of the messages that are going through Superman's mind are after suffering his first defeat? Like, what are those narratives as he's laying there and his body's all beaten and broken? He's got blood dripping out of his mouth. Krypto's dragging him to the Fortress of Solitude. What are some of the negative messages that might be going through his mind? I wrote down a couple that came to my mind. I'd love to hear what yours are. The first one I wrote down was like, I wasn't strong enough. Sometimes that's a message that we wrestle with too. What if I fail again? I mentioned like he's not used to losing, and all of a sudden he loses, and like, what if I fail again? I couldn't stop this character. Is it the Hammer of Bolivia or something? I forget what his name was exactly, but the Hammer, and he couldn't beat him. What if I fail again? And then the third narrative I thought about was like, what if the people stop believing in me? These are real messages that as he's being dragged into the Fortress of Solitude, like he doesn't need to heal just his body. He's got to heal that narrative, because that starts to maybe potentially, if he doesn't examine those narratives, it's going to seep into him and start to change what he believes about his capacity and his capabilities and what he's able to achieve. And so what's really cool about this is you see kind of this therapeutic modality at play. So these robots not only help him physically heal, but they begin to play this message from his Kryptonian parents. And you see this message just start to bring this like self-soothing to Superman. So I was able to kind of grab this quote. I'll just read it. And I can't say it as beautifully as they do in the movie, partly because I don't speak Kryptonian, and just because I'm me, and so you're going to hear my voice. So it says this: "We love you more than heaven, our son. We love you more than land. Our beloved home will soon be gone forever. But hope vitalizes our hearts, and that hope is you, Kal-El. We have searched the universe for a home where you can do the most good and live out Krypton's truth, and that place is Earth." And you see Superman reciting this, verbalizing this, as if he's heard this message 1,000 times. And it made me start to think, like, what does this message represent to him? When he's hearing this message and he's reciting it out loud and copying it as he's hearing it, what does it represent? What does it do for him? What value does it create for him? So I thought of three things that this message creates. One is comfort. So you see Clark mouthing the word. Despite all these injuries and the pain he has, he's finding comfort in this message. It's soothing to him. The second thing is connection. Hearing this message is a connection to his biological parents and his culture. And that feeling of connection is strengthening him. And then to me, really the third one was the most powerful one. It's a message of affirmation. It's affirming his purpose. It's affirming who he is. It's affirming where he comes from. And it's really affirming what he believes. This hope that he can do good and live out Krypton's truth. And it's affirming this message. And so you see in this act, they're not just physically healing his body. He's experiencing mental and emotional healing from being beat up by this Hammer character. And all of a sudden he's recharging and he's able to jump back in the fight, not just because his body is better, but his mind is better as well. And I think this metaphor is really important for us to reflect on. So Clark uses solitude to find comfort, and he reaffirms his beliefs and values. Because if he doesn't go to solitude, if he doesn't actually physically go to the Fortress of Solitude, he can't heal. And I think this is a message that we need to hear in a world that's really cluttered and busy and distracted, that sometimes one of the most mentally healthy things that we can do is just pursue solitude. Not just for the sake of being alone, but so that we can heal, so that we can examine the narratives that are running through our mind and reaffirm them, reaffirm the positive ones, or we can reject the negative ones, so we can find comfort and connection and experience that affirmation that's really healing. And so I love that there's actual metaphor of that in this movie. I think it's really powerful. So this is kind of what allows him to kind of get back up and get back in the fight. Let's fast forward a little bit. So he the fight ends up kind of in a standstill. The Hammer of Bolivia flies off, and so it turns out that this was just strictly a distraction for Lex to be able to break into the Fortress of Solitude and try to find something they can use to like really turn the people against Superman and really damage his reputation and damage what people kind of believe about him. And Lex has this crazy opportunity now, because the engineer character, she kind of uses her weird nanotechnology to check in and kind of tap into the little center console there, and she finds this message that Clark has been listening to, but she finds out it's incomplete and there's more to it. And so Lex has this opportunity to really reshape the people around the world about what they believe and what they think about Superman. And so Lex releases this crazy monster to distract everybody as he's finding this stuff out. And then he starts to play this message out. And this message starts off as this normal message he's heard for his entire life. And then you find out, like, oh, their parents sent him to Earth not because of this comfort, but because they believe that they're weaker than him. And he wants to rule over them. He wants them to kind of use his power over them so he can become this like godlike character at their expense. And instantly, just like that, everybody's belief in Superman is radically changed. They don't see him as this beacon of hope anymore. They see him as like the skeptic, through the skeptical lens, and they see this guy. And the question that you can see they pose is like, can Superman be trusted? Because if he's here to lord over us and he's the ultimate, most powerful being in the universe, like, we can't do anything to stop him. And if his intentions are not pure, this is not somebody I want to surrender to or submit to. But you see in this movie, the people, their mindset and their behavior start to change. They throw a can. It's in the trailer. They throw a can at the back of Superman's head. They start yelling at him. They start to hide their kids from him. And you see, just like we talked about earlier, our beliefs fuel our behaviors. The people's belief in Superman is changing, and as a result, their behaviors are quickly changing. And it's interesting because at the same time that people's beliefs are changing, you see Clark and Superman's beliefs start to change too, because this message was so important to him. And now it's different. The message is totally changed. There's new context that changes the meaning of this message. And you realize, like, this message was incomplete. And it's starting to change everything about his, what he believes about himself, his parents, his purpose in this world. And his Kryptonian parents are suddenly not who he thought they were. They stand for something totally different than he does. And now he's like really at this crossroads in his belief system. It's really, I think it's fascinating because these are things that we experience on a day-to-day basis. We just maybe don't understand them fully, or maybe they're subconscious, but you see how I'm playing out in real life with him. Of like, I don't know who I am right now because everything that I believed in this world just changed just like that. And I don't know what to do with that information. And it's really interesting because now he's viewed as a villain and wanted by the government. He's arrested. He's taken to an interdimensional space prison. He's exposed to kryptonite versus this strange shape-shifting creature. He breaks free. He rescues a green space baby. And then he escapes, but now he has kryptonite poisoning. So maybe that's not exactly what we would do or how our life would play out when we're at the kind of the crossroads of our belief system. I don't know if you've ever had to rescue a green space baby or have been trapped in an interdimensional space prison. But if you have, let me know. I'd love to know that. That would be a fascinating conversation. But after this is where we can start to relate with the character again. So no more green space babies, no more interdimensional space prisons. He's been poisoned again, kind of similar to the very beginning of the movie. In fact, I think this section of the movie really mirrors the opening scene. He needs solitude again, but instead of going back to the fortress of solitude, he finds solitude in his earthly parents, his adoptive parents, Ma and Pa Kent. So he returns home so that he can heal. But again, just like the beginning, he doesn't just need to heal physically. He needs to heal mentally and emotionally because he's devastated right now. There's a scene. I wish I had this movie. It comes out in a few weeks to purchase, and it'd probably be streaming maybe in September after that. I don't know exactly, but so I tried to jot down the quotes as best as I could. But he starts to talk to Pa Kent, and he just says, "This message or that message from my biological parents is like everything to me. It's why I do what I do, and now it doesn't mean anything, and it's broken and damaged. And it messes him up." And Clark says, I'm not who I thought I was. And the dad just takes this moment. I love this part of the movie so much. He just says, what that message means to you is more important than what it actually says. And he says this line that they share in the trailer. I love it so much. Your choices are what make you who you are. It's not just the message, it's your choice. It's what you choose to take away from that message is what really makes that message so powerful. And I think this is it's really good to introduce another therapeutic tool or theory, really. It's a simple one, but it's a really powerful one. It's called choice theory. So there's a guy named William Glasser who kind of built this model around choice. And it's a beautiful therapeutic model that we don't think about this every day, but it's something that impacts us all the time. But it's really to summarize choice theory, it's shifting our focus away from the external and all of the things that are outside of our control, and instead shifting our focus to the internal, the things that we do have control over. And one of the tools I use often with my clients is called the circle of control. And it's a way to operationalize this choice theory. So the way I like to draw it is you draw a big circle on the left side of the sheet of paper, and on the right side, you just leave space. And at the top of it, I'll draw like a horizontal line, and I'll just put on the inside of the circle, I'll write control. And on the other side where there's a line, I'll put no control. And I like to help people think about what is it that I have control over? And what is it that I don't have control over? And oftentimes you'll see this on a little pictograph or something online on Google or social media shared. And it's a good reminder to recognize like the things that we have control over are our thoughts, our feelings, our responses to criticism, our responses to hardship, our emotional regulation, the way we process information, the choices that we make, right? And the things that are outside of our control are often other people's thoughts and feelings, other people's perceptions of us. We might be able to influence those things by the way we respond, but we don't have control over what people think about us. We don't have control over other people's thoughts and feelings and behaviors. And so when we use this little diagram to identify what we have control over and what we don't have control over, it becomes really powerful to get clarity about like, where do I need to redirect my energy? So if we look at this choice theory, really the idea is like, how do I stop wasting my energy on things I can't control and start to redirect that energy where I might be butting heads against something and redirect it to things I do have control over? And oftentimes that can help us get unstuck in areas that we might be really stuck or struggling in. And so you see this now. This is what Pa Kent is teaching Superman in this moment. Like, your choices are what make you who you are. He has the choice of how he responds to this. His belief system has been radically adjusted, shaped in a way that really is altering to him. And yet he gets to choose what he does with that. And this is why I love this movie and why I love the character of Superman so much. In the midst of everything and all the chaos and all of the changing beliefs of all the people, in the midst of all of the hatred from Lex Luthor and the things that he's trying to do to Superman, Superman chooses hope. This is why I love the movie's tagline and why I bought that specific poster for my therapy office. Look up. To me, this phrase, look up, is a representation of choosing to hope. Superman chooses to hope. And right after this conversation is happening, you see him regain the fight, regain the sense of hope that he has, because the world around him is starting to go into chaos. There's this conflict that's happening and all of these things. Before I dive into that, though, I want to kind of point out something that I find really interesting. So there's an author and a social worker named Brene Brown, and she has this quote I really like. It says, "Hope is not what most people think it is. It's not just a warm, fuzzy emotion that fills us with a sense of possibility. Hope is a way of thinking. It's a cognitive process." So choosing hope means that like we evolve our belief system and all of our beliefs and intentionally organize our thoughts around what's true, and it paints an accurate picture about a future that we can choose. So this is what you start to see Superman doing. He's choosing in the midst of all of these other things to reorganize his thinking about like, what do I want to take away from my parents' message? Not just my biological parents, but now my earthly parents. And what do I want to take away from what they're teaching me that helps me regain a sense of hope and optimism and kindness in the midst of all this chaos and destruction? And so I think I want to introduce another therapeutic theme here, which is choosing hope often requires something that in the therapy world we call radical acceptance. So radical acceptance is really a simple way of just saying, we're choosing to fully accept our reality as it is versus the one that we want or one that we prefer or the one that should have happened. Where we choose to accept it as it is versus fighting against the way it should be, not judging or criticizing or resisting against it. We're just choosing to accept something. And again, it goes back to that circle of control. We're shifting our energy away from things that we can't control and towards the things that we can. And in order to do that, we have to accept things as they are. That's a really hard thing to do when you've experienced loss, when you've experienced trauma, when life has just not gone your way over and over and over again. I don't have enough time to share my full story, but this is kind of why I named my practice Resilient Heart Therapy. I've had a lot of loss in my life, not just death of a loved one, although I have quite a few losses there, but also just other types of losses, like losing your dream job or, having to, change your career path or having a major, medical diagnosis that shapes everything about your life. These are really hard things to cope with. And if your energy is spent on wishing the life that you don't have is the one that you continue to have, like if I'm going like, I wish this didn't happen and I want my old life back, it's okay to feel that way. Processing that is a part of the grief process. But if I don't start to accept the current as is, I get stuck. And now all of my mindset and all of my energy and resources go into like fighting this reality that I want to be different than how it is. and I get stuck. I can't change that. And so radical acceptance allows me to start to accept things as they are instead of as they should be. And it doesn't mean that we're okay with that. Like, I think I heard this one trainer talk about, like, sometimes if the word acceptance is too hard for us because it just means that we're accepting something we just don't like. He said that instead, maybe substitute it with the word making peace with, almost to like reconcile this. So maybe I don't want this to happen, because usually, especially with loss and trauma, it's not something that we're choosing because we wanted it. No, like there's none of that stuff. I would choose to trade it all in again for having my mom back, not having some medical diagnoses that have really radically shaped my life, having other family members back, not having to go through infertility and all these other things. And yet I don't have that choice. And so radical acceptance is going, well, what can I do with what I've been through? And so maybe I can't accept it, but maybe I can make peace with it. And if that's you listening to this, maybe that's the choice, is to, if you're struggling with accepting things as they are, maybe there's a way to make peace with it, to become okay with this idea that this isn't the hand I chose, but this is the hand I'm going to play because I want to have more power over my life. And that's ultimately what we're talking about here with radical acceptance. Is it gives me the power back over the things I can control and the choices I can make. And that feeling is very empowering. And we need that feeling of power and control to make positive changes in our life. And that's what Superman does. So let's go back to Superman in this movie. So you see this acceptance of the reality of the situation. I didn't choose to have this message from my parents come out to the public, but I'm going to do something with this. So I'm going to choose hope. And so you see him fight for that. And so this fuels him really for the rest of the movie. You see he goes on to fight Ultraman and the Engineer. In the midst of that, he finds out that Ultraman is really a clone of himself, and that's why he keeps losing, because he's fighting against a stronger, more powerful version of him that's being controlled by Lex Luthor. I love that fight scene, by the way. Like, 1A, 1A. You see this intensity of Lex as he's trying to, like, beat Superman to the ground, and his using his intellect with Superman's powers, and it's a really formidable, complex thing to fight. So you see, but this is the other part I love. You see Superman's hope begins to fuel the Justice Gang. So the Justice Gang is really out for themselves at first, but based on the hope that Superman is creating for this world of like standing up to fight in the midst of a world that doesn't like you, you see it inspire the Justice Gang. Like, hey, Superman can't be in two places at once, and right now this world needs Superman, and the biggest threat is this crazy interdimensional rift that's forming in Metropolis. But there's this other international conflict that they also need Superman. So maybe we can show up where Superman can't be in two places at once, and maybe we can go. And it's all based on the hope that they feel and the inspiration that's really led by this little boy who lifts up this flag in the midst of this international conflict. And it's got the Superman logo on it, and it's kind of a handmade little flag that he has. And you see him just say the words, Superman, Superman, and it's being posted on the news, and it's just so powerful. And the hope that Superman is becomes contagious, and the Justice Gang takes action on behalf of Superman. So Superman takes on Lex, he confronts him, and then he goes into this amazing monologue. This is the heart of the movie that the Man of Steel movie from 2013 just doesn't have. The heart of the movie in that 2013 version is really the parental themes that are in that movie. And I love that because of Kevin Costner and Russell Crowe. This movie doesn't have that aspect as much, but what it does is it just highlights the humanity of Clark and what he believes. So there's this quote at the end as he's taking on Lex face to face. It says, "I'm as human as anyone. I love, I get scared. I wake up every morning, and despite not knowing what to do, I put one foot in front of the other, and I try to make the best choices I can. I screw up all the time, but that is being human, and that is my greatest strength." I love that part so much. And you can see it's contrasting with Lex, who everything he's doing is being driven by this belief in envy. Like, he hates Superman to his core, and he talks about being envious of everything that everyone else has because he wants to be the greatest and he wants to be the most powerful. And Superman is a threat to him in that way. And so as then Lex kind of gives a counter monologue, one of the best parts of the movie happens, which is Krypto comes in and just wipes them out. It kind of reminds me of like the 2012 Avengers movie when Hulk just destroys Loki and flops around like a little ragdoll. That's kind of how Krypto treats Lex, and it's so funny because Krypto is so chaotic in this movie. There's like 4 or 5 different scenes where Krypto comes out of nowhere and just uses his super strength along with his chaotic puppy mindset to just destroy something. But in this case, it happens to be the main villain, Lex Luthor. I just thought that was so much fun. But you see, everything he's done is being his choice to embrace his humanity, because he's part of two cultures. He's this Kryptonian god figure, and yet he's also the son of these parents who grew up on a farm in Kansas. And so he's choosing to honor the humanity that he was born with and the humanity he learned from his adoptive parents in order to really make change in this world. And that belief system fuels everything he does. And that's what starts to change the people's beliefs around them again. The truth of Lex's manipulation starts to come out. And it starts to shape the people's beliefs about Superman again in a positive way. And that wouldn't have happened had Clark not chose to continue with hope and optimism and kindness. If he had chose to react to the anger and the hatred of the people by fighting back with anger and hatred, it would have doubled down the pain and the anger and the lack of trust. And so the thing that I think that we can take away from is like, this is so indicative of our times right now where everything in our world and our culture is about like, who can hate less or who can hate this or who can stand up and fight these things, but it's all driven by hate and anger and fear. And this movie says, like, in the midst of all of that stuff that I can't control, what would it look like to continue to cling to hope and to optimism and to kindness and to lead out of that in a way that becomes inspirational and makes a wave around me, even if it's not easy. And Superman just keeps showing up that way, and I love it so much. So it reminds me to just stop for a second. I like to ask kind of reflection questions in therapy. So I don't get to hear your answers to these questions, but I want to make you think as you're thinking about this movie. Because again, it's a comic book movie. It's lighthearted, but there's some really powerful themes of this. So I want to ask you a couple reflection questions. Where do you need to look up? Where do you need to choose to hope again? What narratives or what core beliefs might be preventing you from looking up, from choosing to hope? And do you have a fortress of solitude that you can return to find healing? Maybe it is physical healing like in this movie, but primarily for emotional healing or for mental healing, to change those narratives, to find comfort, to find affirmation. Do you have that fortress of solitude in your life right now? It's something that is so needed. And therapy can be a small part of that, but really, you see someone an hour a week, it's not enough time. You really need to cultivate that in your own life. And a therapist can help you with that. But creating some solitude where you can think and reflect and find that inner healing is so, so important. I want to end with talking about just like the real life example and the embodiment of this movie. So I finally watched the documentary. It's on HBO Max. It's called Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. And it came out in 2024. And I love the embodiment of the character of Christopher Reeves. I think he embodies Superman almost better than any other actor. And Christopher Reeves was not a perfect person. He made mistakes too. But later on in his life, after he's played Superman 4 times, he has this horrible accident where he's riding a horse training for this race, and he falls and he breaks his neck and he's paralyzed. And this documentary does a great job wrestling with the choices that he had, because he admits like he didn't want to live. He didn't want to live as a paraplegic. And so after the accident, Christopher Reeves has this choice. Do I want to stay on life support, or do I want to come off and let me kind of just expire? And his wife goes up to him, and he shares this quote, and it's such an emotional part of the documentary. His wife says, "It's your life and your choice, and I will be with you for the long haul no matter what. But I want you to know that you are still you, and I love you." And Christopher Reeves says that quote saved his life. He realized that I'm not alone in this, and I have something to continue to look forward to. And that quote gave him hope. And so he made the choice to continue his life forward as a quadriplegic, I should say. And that quote gave him power to choose to keep living. In the movie, it gives this quote that Christopher Reeves says, and I thought it was really cool. It just says, "America is short on heroes. We need something. We need all the heroes that we can get. Superman may be make-believe, but the qualities of courage and of character that make him unique are very real." What would it look like for us to choose those characteristics, to find things in our lives that can help us aspire to be courageous, to live with character and optimism and kindness? Reeves also later on talks about the definition of being a hero, and he shares that he had 2 different definitions. And the first one, his original definition, just said someone who commits a courageous action without considering the consequences. But then later on, as he went through what he went through with being paralyzed, it changed. And he said being a hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles. And I think about that from a therapy standpoint. Like, so many people go through really hard things in life that feel like they're beyond what they can cope with. So being heroic in that is choosing to find the inner strength. And sometimes we don't have it on our own, and we have to muster it up by our support system, by another therapist, but someone that we can lean on as we rebuild our strength, as we rebuild our hope. And I think that's really important, because there's a lot of beautiful ways to be heroic, even in the midst of really awful and hard circumstances. And I think that's something I try to aspire to as not just a therapist, but as a person. Like I've been through hard things. I'm continuing to go through hard things. And I think it would be a disservice to my clients if I pretended that that wasn't the case. I don't share about all my stuff, but I like to share like some things, because I think it's really important people know like they're not alone. And if part of my story of going through major diagnoses and losses and life events that didn't go your way, like if that can create hope and optimism for other people, then I'm all for it. And I think that's so important. That's what defines heroism, both in this movie, in that Christopher Reeves documentary, and just in real life. I think that the movie ends in such a beautiful way. Going back to the Superman movie, at the end he goes back and he says, "Show me the message from my parents," but instead of showing his biological parents, it shows his adoptive parents. It shows photos of him growing up as a child. It shows the memories of them caring for him and loving him and playing with him. It shows him making these little superhero poses, and this beautiful song comes on at the end about just punk rock. And it drives home the message that kindness is the real punk rock. Punk rock back in the 70s, 80s was this rebellious movement of countercultural movement. And I think today, to think of kindness as the countercultural movement is so powerful. To look at kindness as a form of punk rock in a world that is cynical, or in a world that's like hardened and beaten up and full of hate and divisiveness, what would it look like to choose kindness? Is that really our culture's new version of punk rock? And if so, what would it look like to live that way with kindness and optimism and hope? And so to me, that's the challenge that this movie leaves people with, and it ends that way. I think it's so powerful to go like, would you be willing to be a punk rocker by living with kindness?